What do you think the theme of this race is going to be? What is it that conservative members need to really decide on?
Well, I think they need to choose a leader who can unite the party around freedom. Freedom binds us all together, unites our movement, and can attract this, not just the voters, but the incredible rush of energy that we're seeing from young people.
Hello there and welcome to Cancel This. I'm your host, Angelo Isidorou, and today we have a doozy of an episode. We are speaking with the one and only Pierre Poilievre. Many of you know who Pierre Poilievre is. Well, who am I kidding? All of you know who Pierre Poilievre is. He's a very famous conservative MP out of Ontario. He's super viral online. In fact, the most viral Canadian MP in history, and he is running to be the next leader of the party. I'm massively grateful for being able to talk to him today and to bring you that content. We talk about all sorts of things from cryptocurrency to economics to inflation to freedom of speech and freedom issues. He says something near the end of this podcast so awesome about uniting the country around freedom, so you're not going to want to miss it. Like I said, I'm Angelo Isidorou, and this is Cancel This. Pierre, thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be with you, Angelo.
So I've been following you for a long time. I think most Canadians, conservatives, know who you are. You've sort of dominated social media. And now you're running to be the next leader, which, again, personally, I feel like has been a long time coming. I've had a lot of friends, even American friends, send me videos that they find that somehow get to the US and they say, oh, your leader is so cool. And at that time, like, well, he's not our leader, he's just an MP. And then I have to explain what an MP is. But long story short, it's great that you're running and it's great that you're here. I wanted to just jump right into it. The Conservative Party seems to be at a crossroads. There's this prevailing narrative that, well, if the Conservative Party wants to win, they need to pivot left, bring in a carbon tax, effectively become more liberal. And we sort of tried that, and whether that worked or not, I'll leave up to others. But do you subscribe to that idea that the Conservative Party effectively needs to, quote unquote, modernize?
Well, there's two questions there. One is where we should be on the political spectrum, and the other is whether or not we should, quote unquote, modernize. So let's start with the first question. Where should we be on the political spectrum? The answer is nowhere, which is exactly where everyone else is. The political spectrum is a meaningless construct created by academics that fills textbooks and then fills the brains of political commentators, even though it is an absolutely abstract idea that has no relation to reality. When I go out door knocking in my suburban Ontario riding here in a big city of Ottawa, liberal city, where I've won and I'm undefeated in 7 elections, I never get voters tell me where they are in the political spectrum. They don't say, well, I'm 6 degrees right of this placement, or I'm a blue Tory or a red Tory or a blue liberal, or any of those other names that we invent in the political world. What they say is, I'm a single mother who can't buy groceries because they're too expensive. I'm a 32-year-old living in my mom's basement because it's too expensive to buy a house. I am a plumber who has a hard time getting to job sites because it costs $1.60 a liter for gas. So instead of talking about where we find ourselves on the political spectrum, we should obsess about how our policies affect the lives of the people whose support we need. So that's why I don't talk about the political spectrum. I try to unite my coalition around the overall principle of freedom and the highly practical objective of making people's paychecks go further. I think people want to take back control of their lives. One of the ways that happens is by protecting the purchasing power of their paychecks so they can buy the things that make them free citizens, like a house. I mean, right now you don't have the freedom to choose where you live because the vast majority of millennials cannot afford the $36,000 cost of the typical home. You don't have a single mom doesn't have the freedom to choose what she feeds her kids anymore, because a basket of groceries is up $1,000 this year and probably going to rise more. And many people don't have the freedom of mobility because they can't afford $1.80 a liter to gas up their car and go somewhere. So I call it just inflation. It's the result of all this cash that Trudeau's been printing. I want to stop printing money, start creating more of the things money buys, like making more energy, growing more food, building more houses, so that people can afford to take control of their lives and their own personal decisions. That's where we need to be.
Very interesting. And I agree. It seems like this whole left-right paradigm, and then you have, are you a libertarian or what are you? It seems like it's broken in the modern day. And I feel, especially in Canada, you have a great point. You mentioned housing. So let's just get into that. I'm a Vancouverite. So I am one of those people that you're talking about that lives in a basement. Because Vancouver has outrageous real estate prices. It is basically, without exaggeration, almost impossible for me and my partner to really live in this city. And that's a result of numerous things. But why do you think that, your messaging on housing resonates? Like, is it as simple as I can't afford anything and I'm a young person? Like, what would you do as prime minister, and how do you think it would resonate with people?
Well, let me first define the problem. The cost of government is driving the cost of living. Inflation is at a 30-year high. Housing inflation smashed records last year. Prices increased by about 30% year over year. In fact, the typical house, according to the Real Estate Association, costs $836,000 in the most recent reported month, which was January. That was a $24,000 monthly increase from December. So what's the why? How is government driving up the cost of housing? Well, two ways. They're ballooning demand and restricting supply. How are they ballooning demand? Well, the government under Trudeau printed about $400 billion of new cash to fund his deficits. But the way that money enters the economy is through the mortgage and banking system, where it's been basically lent out in and used to bid up housing prices. Now, wealthier people tend to get their hands on that easy cash, as do investment firms. Wealthy private equity funds are now actually buying up suburban detached homes, not just apartment complexes, but actual suburban neighborhoods are being bought up by large financial institutions who have access to newly created government cash, and they're then using that cash to outbid working class people and creating a new permanent tenant class of people who've calculated they will never be able to own a home. Meanwhile, local bureaucracies prevent construction. In Vancouver, it costs $600,000 per in government for every housing unit. That's taxes, development charges, permit delays, paperwork, consultants, all the stuff with government. $600,000 per house. My house costed less than $600,000 in total, but just the governmental red tape cost in Vancouver is higher than that. So you have the federal government subsidizing demand, the local governments restricting supply, demand up, supply down, higher prices. So how do I reverse that? One, I'm going to stop government from printing money, reorient the Bank of Canada's mandate back to protecting the purchasing power of our dollars with low inflation. Two, I'm going to incentivize municipalities through the carrot of infrastructure dollars to speed up building permits and reduce the cost of approvals to build houses. Three, I'm going to sell off 15% of the 37,000 federal buildings that are already underutilized with two private sector purchasers who can convert it into affordable housing. So it's really simple, Angelo. I'm going to sum it up like this. Stop printing money, start building houses. That's the solution.
Well, that's very well said. But in addition to housing, like I said, I live in BC, and we've just broken a record in gas prices. So in case you were saving up to buy a house, if you go to pump gas, I think we're the highest in the country right now. We've broken a record. Inflation is out of control. We have a carbon tax here as well. So we have, we're getting screwed in multiple levels of government. I mean, that's a whole other issue. I mean, you've talked about this a lot, and you've said something that really has made a lot of conservatives happy, which is that you would just scrap the carbon tax. You're not, and I want to ask this sincerely because I think a lot of people have been traumatized. When you say scrap the carbon tax, you don't mean it reintroduce some weird point system or anything like that. You mean scrap it.
I mean, scrap it. It's legally called the fuel charge. That's what the government calls it. And it's the federal government that has imposed it. And I will scrap that. And I will not replace it with another tax.
Amazing. So then in addition to the carbon tax, you have inflation like you talked about. I mean, what would you say to critics that say, well, our gas is going up, everything's going up because of Ukraine, and that's the reason and nothing else? I mean, I've actually heard liberal pundits say that.
Right. Okay. So let's go through this. First of all, a large share of your tax bill is taxes. There's gas taxes, carbon taxes, and then sales taxes on all of those other taxes. So government can control that, and I'm going to get rid of the carbon tax. And this is an area where Jean Charest is as bad, if not worse, than Trudeau. He supported a carbon tax, raised the fuel tax, and it raised the sales tax in Quebec. So life will get more expensive under Jean Charest, as it did in Quebec when he was Liberal premier there. I'm the only candidate so far who's announced that believes in lower taxes. So that's the tax issue. Secondly, now you say, okay, is some global factor to blame for high gas prices in Canada? Well, not quite, because it is true that oil is an internationally priced commodity. However, the value of the Canadian dollar determines how much it costs in Canada. So, for example, if we are at par with the Americans, then we have higher purchasing power for internationally priced goods than if we are at 78 cents to the US dollar, right? So in which case, the cost of purchasing an international good like oil goes up by 25%. Now, why is our dollar so weak? It shouldn't be. Normally, when oil prices rise, the Canadian dollar rises with them. And we, back in 2014, oil prices were over $100. And we were at parity with the Americans. Now oil prices are at 125 or something like that. And we are still, 15% lower value of our dollar. Why is that? Well, one, we've been printing cash, and that dilutes the value of our dollar on the global scale. More supply of anything lowers its value. And second, Trudeau's kneecapped our energy sector. When we were producing more energy and selling it to the world had to buy Canadian dollars to get our energy, and that increased our dollar, right? So what does that mean for the consumer? They have a more powerful dollar to buy gas with. So that is a domestic phenomenon. When your dollar is weak, it is because your government has made your economy weak, and a low dollar lowers your purchasing power of internationally priced goods like oil and gas. So what's my solution? One, instead of creating cash, I'm going to create more of what cash buys. We're going to unleash the production of Canadian energy again so that we can sell it to the world at world prices and get pipelines built to deliver it to market. And we're going to create less cash. Create more of what cash buys. That will increase the buying power of your paycheck.
Wanted to ask you about, and I've seen a lot of interest in this, is cryptocurrency. You've shown some interest in the topic. Conservatives in general have shown interest in the topic. When you've spoken about cryptocurrency, I've noticed this huge wave of cryptocurrency enthusiasts, whatever you want to call them, many of whom I know, many of whom have never voted before or voted Liberal or for someone else, getting really excited about the Conservative Party because it's introducing these fresh ideas. I mean, it is important to introduce fresh ideas, but what made you interested in cryptocurrency, and where do you see the future of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in Canada?
So I discovered it when I began learning about how the federal government through the Bank of Canada was abusing our money. They started printing cash to finance Trudeau's deficits. And then I started to realize that this was an inflation tax. I call it just inflation. And because what it does is allows Trudeau to spend printed money, but instead of a normal tax increase that's passed through Parliament, he basically passes it on through inflation. More dollars chase fewer goods, bidding up their prices. People pay more for food, houses, gas, etc. And then Trudeau gets the windfall through his spending. So I started saying, well, what are people's alternatives if the government has a monopoly on currency? And I discovered that people are seeking out technological alternatives. For example, Bitcoin, which for those who are not knowledgeable on the subject, Bitcoin is a decentralized public ledger of transactions that does not require an intermediary. People can buy and sell the coins or the Satoshis, which are the subunits of the Bitcoins, through the ledger without going through a bank. And there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, so there's a limit on the supply, unlike fiat currency, which is limitless. And there's no one in particular who controls it because it's a decentralized ledger that is controlled by the majority of the processing power on the network. So I thought this is a fascinating idea. I'm not going to make any predictions about where it will end up. I don't make predictions about stock prices or asset prices or commodities, so I won't make them about crypto either. But I will say that I think people should have the freedom to use these other assets in their commerce, as long as they're following all the laws that they would normally follow when they use fiat money. So, if you earn a living in crypto, you should pay taxes on that in the same rates as you would earning a living with fiat. Anything that's criminal when you use fiat money, it should be criminal when you're using crypto. It should all be a simple level playing field. Right now in Canada, it is legal to buy stuff with cryptographic assets. That, as the Bank of Canada says, you can actually use anything to buy stuff today under the law. There's only one legal tender, and that, of course, is the Canadian dollar. But you can, under the law today, make purchases if you have a willing seller using cryptographic assets. And I think that should remain. We should allow for competition, and we should allow people to look for choice, have the choice to seek out the best means of exchange that they can find, and then let the market determine what that is, as long as everybody's following the same statutory law and playing by the same overall rules. Then I think we should maximize people's freedom of choice.
It seems like the Trudeau government is not a fan of cryptocurrency. They seemingly want to regulate it. I know they went to do that when they activated the Emergencies Act. Would you regulate it in any way?
Well, it's already regulated. The platforms are regulated. And I think they already have a bunch of rules for know your customer and so on. So I think it should just be treated. So, for example, a non-fungible token should be treated like a similar security would be treated, or a similar ownership title would be treated in the traditional economy. As I understand it, a non-fungible token, for example, is very similar to like a title and deed for a house. So, all of the rules that apply to buying and selling houses, in terms of banning fraud and banning money laundering, should be the same in the cryptographic world. When it comes to Bitcoin, it is right now, I think, deemed to be a digital asset by the government. So it should be treated like other assets are. And it is, for the most part. For example, if you have a gain in Bitcoin, you pay a capital gain on it the same way you would currently pay a capital gain on a foreign held currency that you dispose of. So my view is a level playing field. Just create a simple set of rules that apply both in the cryptographic world and in the traditional world, and treat everybody the same. I think that then you can allow people to make their own free decisions within the context of that level playing field.
Okay. So next topic is my favorite world, culture wars. So when we look at the country, quite frankly, again, I'm a young guy, I'm 25. Maybe there was a time when it was this divided, but I personally do not recall a time in which Canada has been this divided. We live under a government that has effectively turned us against one another and is treating certain portions of society as lepers. And personal freedoms have become a serious issue, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of movement, whatever. It's become a serious issue for conservative voters. I'm sure you've noticed this, whether it's the mandates or even if we take a step back and look at, Bill C-10, which wants to censor social media. It's a massive, massive issue for conservatives and for Canadians. And you have sort of, led the charge in the Conservative Party on this issue. Have you been surprised at all by how huge personal freedom issues have become? Like, effectively, as far as I could tell, they're just as important as many of these fiscal issues.
Yes, I have been surprised because, freedom is kind of like oxygen. You only notice it when it's gone. You've asked someone, do you appreciate your oxygen? Well, they say, well, yeah, I guess. I've never thought of it before. Well, the same typically was the case in Canada because we always had so much freedom that we never really had to think much about it. Then all of a sudden we got this government that was using every occasion, every opportunity to take more power for itself and leave less freedom for the people. And I think Trudeau has seen, look, Freeland was honest about it. Give her credit. She was very honest. She said that COVID was a political opportunity, in her own words, a political opportunity. And they have viewed it that way. They've asked themselves, how can they add more and more power to their inventory of authorities and leave people with less and less freedom? The more recent example is Bill C-11. You said C-10, and you're right. In the last parliament, it was C-10. Now the new bill is called C-11. Just as bad. They want to give the CRTC the power to regulate what people see and say on the internet. I'm against that, 100% against it. I think people should be able to choose your show or any other show, and they can choose with a click rather than. I think clicks should decide. Click of your finger, not the cliques in the government, should decide what we see and say online. Then on COVID, you think about why in the world would Trudeau have brought in this mandate on truckers? The rest of the world is actually lifting mandates. And truckers are the people who are least likely to transmit a virus because they're alone all day and all night in their truck. And so he brought it in because he thought it would divide. He would do a serious injury to a group of people who we'd all been calling heroes not so long ago when they were delivering goods and services across the border without vaccines. And then suddenly he decided that this was a problem, and he targeted these people. And then he started calling them horrible names. And that was a deliberate divide and conquer strategy. And so we have to call it out for what it is and replace divide and conquer with unite for freedom.
So you think that he was actually Machiavellian when he did that? You think that
absolutely.
He wanted to divide? You don't think he's just an idiot?
Well, look at how he managed vaccine mandates. So his government had decided against vaccine mandates in the federal public service. His chief human resources officer had emailed that decision to all the public servants saying, you don't need to get vaccinated, you can get tested. Then 2 or 3 days into the writ period of the election, in a campaign stop, he reverses his own government's decision because he saw a political opportunity to isolate and stigmatize an apparently unpopular minority in order to win more support for himself with the majority of people who were vaccinated, myself included. But so he has deliberately sought to stigmatize and ostracize people through dividing them on the issue of vaccines. And he thinks that this is a way that he can consolidate power and hold on to office. I think the exact opposite is true. We should unite Canadians around their freedoms. I believe we should encourage folks to get vaccinated. I am vaccinated, but I don't think we should punish them or exclude them from society if, for their own reasons, they make a different choice. So uniting for freedom is how I look at this. The corollary to Trudeau's approach.
But you would think that the Liberals would understand the precedent that is set when you effectively take down protesters, freeze their bank accounts. I mean, it's such a dark thing. Like what you're describing historically, the idea of, appealing to people's worst nature to others and become more tribal. It's such a dark thing for a society to go through. And I think, quite frankly, it's embarrassing, right? I mean, when we were going through this whole past month, people around the world, people I know from the UK were messaging me saying, man, like what's going on in your country? Like we've never seen any. You see this in the East. You don't see this in the Western world. So do you think they're just not thinking that far ahead in terms of how history will remember that?
I do. I think it's myopic. He's thinking, how can he maximize his own political power in the short run by dividing the country in a way that he believes will put more on his side of the dividing line than on the opposing side. It is an ugly political strategy, and I hope that we can raise the debate in this country and raise the level of solidarity across these divisive lines he's created to unite people for freedom and restore respect and kindness to all of our citizens, regardless of their vaccine status or of other personal characteristics that should not divide us.
Okay. So let's say you win. Let's say you become leader. Let's say you kick his butt in the general election. You're prime minister. Obviously, we're not going to have these crazy restrictions and everything because it's probably over by then. But what could you do as prime minister now that you're in power? How do you safeguard freedoms? How do you bolster and strengthen the freedoms in this country to make sure that something like what happened with the truckers doesn't happen again?
Well, I think we restore freedom of speech. So I will repeal C-11 and any other bills that seek to censor what people see and say online. I think that we need to give people more economic freedom by cutting governmental red tape, by putting First Nations in charge of their money and their lands so that they can grow and prosper their people. I think we give immigrants more freedom by incentivizing provinces to recognize foreign credentials. So the thousands of immigrants who come here as doctors and engineers and mechanics can actually work in those occupations and fulfill the dream that brought them here. These are all examples of freedoms that I intend to extend to people when I'm prime minister. My goal is really to put people back in charge of their lives and make Canada the freest place on earth.
Well said. So something I wanted to ask you about is your digital presence. You are, and this isn't me tooting your horn, you're the most viral MP in Canada. You're the most viral MP in Canadian history, just speaking by digital presence. I've worked in digital marketing. Your videos get millions of views. I mean, your announcement video got millions of views. You have a huge, huge following. Were you surprised by how big you've gotten on social media? And how important do you think that dominance in social media is going to be come a general election?
So, yes, I was surprised because it wasn't based on a sort of a clever strategy. I just say the things that I've always believed. And apparently there are a lot of people out here who believe the same things. Basically, if you look at the speeches that have gone viral online, they're consistent with the things I've been saying since I was a teenager. So that suddenly there was so much enthusiasm for those things was a happy surprise. Is it important? Yes, because we need to go around the traditional, predominantly liberal media in order to reach Canadians directly. I also think that our biggest growth potential is not just by stealing votes from other parties, but getting people who have never voted out to the ballot box. And those are the people I'm reaching and who are engaging with me on the major social media platforms. I get, people tell me their teenagers are watching my videos. The guys doing a home renovation are sitting next to their lunch bucket watching my speeches on their phones and then sending me comments back. These are people who are not traditionally involved in politics, and yet we need them to be part of a winning coalition to improve the country. So I think this massive relationship, it's a two-way relationship, because I don't just reach them, they reach me on social media, is going to be a very powerful force to propel our party to victory and ensure that we lead a government that puts people back in charge of their lives and makes the country the freest in the world.
Yeah, I feel like what you just said hit the nail on the head for me, because it goes back to the first question, where there's this notion that we have to somehow always appeal to people who basically hate us and make them not hate us anymore and vote for us. And obviously you need to persuade some people. But what I've noticed with you is the fact that, again, I have friends who aren't political, who frankly have never voted before, sending your videos over. And that to me is a potential that maybe we previously haven't fully explored as conservatives in terms of activating new voters. I think, my final question was going to be, this leadership race, it ends September 10th. What do you think the theme of this race is going to be? What is it that conservative members need to really decide on?
Well, I think they need to choose a leader who can unite the party around freedom. I can unite the party because I'm from Western Canada, but I've been elected 7 times in Ontario, undefeated. I can win a debate against Trudeau in both official languages. I can unite the various thought groups because freedom is really the principle that unites us all as conservatives. Fiscal conservatives want economic freedom, social conservatives want religious freedom, libertarians want online and technological freedom. Rural and firearms conservatives want the right to own their own property without undue confiscation. Progressive conservatives want women and gays and minorities to have the freedoms to live their own lives without government interference or discrimination. So freedom binds us all together, unites our movement, and can attract this, not just the voters, but the incredible rush of energy that we're seeing from young people who've been locked up for 2 years, haven't been able to date or go to the gym or go backpacking or go to a nightclub. And now can't afford they don't have the freedom to choose where they live or what they eat or how far they can drive because of inflation. These people want freedom. They want to take back control of their lives. So really, to sum up, the answer to your question is, who can give people back control of their lives? And I can do that. And that's my purpose in running for this.
Pierre, thank you so much for doing this. That was awesome.
Great to be with you, Angelo.